Welcome to Seven Figures and Beyond with your host, Greg Shuey, your e-commerce marketing expert.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Seven Figures and Beyond e-commerce growth podcast. I hope that everyone is having a fantastic day. I know I am. Here in Utah, it's snowing. We're 3 weeks away from the ski resorts opening, so we're pretty pumped about that. And I'm sure it's nice and sunny in San Diego. Or is it overcast?
No, it's pretty sunny. I mean, it's unusual, but it's sunny.
I love it. Well, today I'm stoked for our discussion and for our guest. So if you've been in e-commerce for a minute, you probably recognize him. Our guest is Neal Goyle. And up until this month, Neal was with a company called Tapcart. You've probably heard of them. There's a good chance your website is running a mobile app powered by them, and that's what they did. So he is now with a company called Disco. They are a post-purchase ad network. We'll let him talk a little bit about that in just a minute. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're not talking about mobile apps, although when I first reached out to him, I wanted to talk about that. But we are going to be talking about the diversification of customer acquisition channels, which is incredibly important because there are so many different ways to acquire new customers. Some are better than others, especially depending on your brand, your industry. And in my personal belief, it's important to have at least two channels going at the same time that work well for your particular brand. And so we're going to talk all about that today. Neal, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, Greg, I'm so excited to be here. I think this is a long time coming. I've been following your journey for a long time. Hats off to all of your success. And so I'm so glad we're doing this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Before we jump in, would you just take a couple of minutes to talk about your history, your story, help our listeners understand where you're coming from and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Yeah. I mean, when we think about just the last several years, I've spent my entire career doing two things for brands, right? Helping them diversify their sales and marketing channels and reduce customer acquisition costs, right? Like my entire career has been devoted to that. And most people are familiar with my journey at Tapcart. I spent the last 3.5 years there and really believed strongly in the channel. Felt like I was, I guess, almost evangelizing the channel myself by virtue of what I was doing on social.
You were the evangelist.
Yeah, I preached like all things mobile commerce, and that worked. There was a huge move that came from that. I had a lot of success at Tapcart. The merchants I was able to serve had a ton of success at Tapcart too. And so I think one of the things that what I loved doing the most over the last several years is understanding what the world of the merchant is. What are the problems that they're facing? What are the challenges that they're navigating? And I was just wanted to learn. And that was actually a large part of my journey on LinkedIn as well. Just the goal to get a little bit closer to the merchant, understand what makes them tick and what resonates with them.
Yep.
And in that journey, I found that the only thing that mattered to them really was just this glooming situation of customer acquisition costs going higher every single year without fail. Right.
Yeah.
When I was departing Tapcart, it was actually a pretty tough thing, right? Because I'd spent 3.5 years kind of marrying my own identity to the world of mobile commerce, right? And so to make the call to join Disco, there had to have been something very just magnetizing about what Disco is doing in order to say, I'm willing to almost separate my identity from preaching all things mobile commerce to going into a different direction, which was more of a top of funnel type of solution. And I was just so excited about it. So, look forward to chatting a little bit more about that today on the show. I'm excited about the big things to come, but I've spent my entire career serving brands and I'm looking forward to doing that in a bigger way as well.
That's amazing. Give me a little plug about Disco.
Yeah. So Disco is the largest post-purchase ad network on Shopify. So if you think about, brands trying to acquire customers and retain customers, those are the two major conundrums that they're trying to do.
That's what you work on. Yep.
That's right. Those are the two things that make a brand move, tick, grow. And what got me so excited about Disco is that we're serving actually both ends of that, right?
Yeah.
Most by being a post-purchase ad network, we're an acquisition channel where you can have your brand served up on the post-purchase checkouts of 1,000 other brands in the network, right?
Yeah.
So think of it going through a grocery store. You're going through, you put a number of items in your cart, you go to the checkout and you see the chewing gum, the candy, the magazines, and it's at that moment where you're at your highest intent. You just haven't added things to cart. You actually have your wallet out at that moment,
Yep.
right? So think of that in a digital sense, right? And now you can have a number of millions of customers across these 1,000 brands also see your brand or products at the moment that their intent is the
Yeah.
highest, right? So that's what gets me so excited about it. The flip side of that is it's not just about any conversions. And you'll see me, I've been preaching, diversify from Meta for years now,
Yep.
right? Um, and what gets me so excited about this one is it's not just about any conversion. It's about the right kinds of customers, right?
Yeah.
Because first purchase profitability is just that biggest challenge right now, right? With rising CAC, becoming profitable on that first purchase is near impossible. Your
Yep.
AOVs have to be so much higher than just 2-3 years ago. And here at Disco, we have live order data and customer profiles of the 1,000 other brands, all orders that are happening across 1,000 brands on Shopify. And so we know what one particular customer, if Greg were to shop on one brand, we already know what his spending was with the 14 other brands that he has shopped with in the network. And therefore, we
Interesting. Yeah.
learn a lot about Greg. And therefore, we make recommendations when he checks out one of those brands, 2 or 3 other brands they may be a great fit for him,
Yeah.
right? So not only are we driving conversions as a sales channel, we're driving the right kinds of customers, the customers that are most likely to be high LTV in that
And to
process.
come back and buy again and again and again. I like that.
LTV. It's all about LTV. It's that only path to profitability. I think I'm a broken record on preaching that. It's true.
Yep. I love it. Cool. So, let's jump in and start talking about channel diversification. When I think back, I was thinking about this a couple hours ago. We started Stride 13 years ago, and we started it because of the need to diversify traffic channels. So I'm an SEO guy. Right? I've been doing SEO since the early 2000s, and I was working for an agency. I was there for about 5 years, and all we did was SEO. And we had some really big clients that were putting in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a month in SEO, and that was their channel. And I got to the end of my time there, and I'm like, no, we can't just do SEO anymore. Right? We've got to start layering in PPC. We've got to start figuring out the Facebook ad side of things. We've got to figure out email. And the agency wasn't willing to pivot and shift like that. And so I left to start an agency that was more diversified, that was more full funnel, that was more holistic in nature. And I think that, brands that pigeonhole themselves into one channel are really doing themselves a disservice. So when you think about, diversification, where does your mind immediately go?
Yeah. My mind immediately goes to understanding a pre-2021 world versus present day, anything after 2021. I think,
Yeah.
when someone, let's call it 2015, 16, when someone started a brand, yes, Shopify had just, hit the scene at that point, made
Yep.
it a lot easier to open up a brand overnight. But there was still an emphasis on brand building because you
Yeah.
still had to do a lot of things to actually get the word out there about your brand, to drive that traffic
Yep.
to the website, right? Paid ads hits the scene. It's new. It's experimental. Take this, dollar bill, fold it up into a paper airplane. It comes back as $10, right?
Yeah.
So it just became super easy. Facebook, hats off to Facebook for making it super easy and digestible for people to understand.
Yeah.
As soon as COVID hit, right, we saw this huge up and to the right move in terms of the number of stores that are blowing up, but at the same time, you saw consumer behavior actually shift and permanently shift, right? So obviously, we saw this massive bull run, right? That is no secret. But what happened in that bull run as with any bull run in any type of market, whether it was the bull run of 2005 and 6 in real estate, whether it was the
Yep.
bull run of the tech era, 99, 2000, right? Bull runs all have a very common theme. And that is, at the tip of that bull run, we have people, actors that come into the market that are looking for like the quickest way to get rich. We're looking for shortcuts.
Yeah.
We're looking at the fastest path to growing a business where it may be a divergence from fundamentals. And that's what we saw in 2020,
Yeah.
right? Where 2019 and early 2020, we saw this big boom. But then for most of the late 2020 and early 21, we saw this shortcuts, oh my gosh, paid ads, paid ads. So paid ads were cheap. Demand from consumers was high.
Yep.
It made for this absolute perfect storm, and many entrants could come into the market. And so it diversification actually took a complete backseat, right? Before
Right.
it had brand building, it had to be like customer experience. It had to be rolling out the red carpet for that customer. It had to be grassroots marketing. Remember that was a thing.
That
Uh,
was the thing.
and it had to be SEO, right?
Yeah.
All these things that were front and center, but you had to do all of them, right?
Yep.
And then Facebook just made it easy, so easy that like everyone kind of abandoned all of those and put 95% of their budget towards Facebook. And again, no harm, no foul there, but there was a departure from fundamentals.
Yeah.
Right. We became so obsessed with direct response, click and conversion,
Yeah.
that we kind of gave brand building that backseat. Right. And so I think that's where the lopsidedness away from diversification really took hold. And so then when iOS 14 happened, it literally caught everyone off guard, right?
Yeah.
When you think of algorithm changes, when you think of like impacts that are happening that are really impacting performance in a negative way, that's been happening with Google and SEO since the beginning of Google, right?
Yep.
It's still, like you're in the SEO game and have been since the beginning of the internet, basically, right? And and that it's constantly changing, and you're always having to change
Yeah.
strategy there. So algorithm changes is no secret to you, but when someone's so over reliant on the channel,
Yep.
then all of a sudden privacy changes hit, catches everyone off guard. Business is over. Oh my God, what's happening? My conversions are dropping. Traffic is not as quite high quality intent. It really caught everyone off guard when it's been happening on every other channel.
Yeah.
Already. So that is the big kind of turning point where diversification became this thing. And then, well, guess what? First 9 months post iOS 14, things were really hard. And as soon as people started to get a grip, algo changes again.
Yep.
And changes again. And all of a sudden, just guess what? They had to put in a little bit more work to rolling out the red carpet, getting the right kind of customers into the funnel. It became more expensive to do so.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where this whole iOS 14 drove the tailwind for owned channels. Get customers into an owned channel so you have more control. Again, hence why email and Klaviyo took off. Hence why attentives and postscripts took off with SMS. Why the tap cards of the world took off with mobile apps and notifications. So I think now, fast forward the clock, CAC is exponentially higher.
Yep.
Diversification hasn't happened with the velocity that it needs to. And we're kind of in this place where brands are, I think we hit that bottom in 2024 in terms of profitability, impact on CAC on the bottom line, and the ability to navigate it.
It's been a tough year for brands, a really tough year. Why do you think that brands keep making this same mistake over and over and over again about just doubling down on a channel? Right? Like I'm talking to brands that are building their business on TikTok Shop, just like that one channel. What are we doing? Why do you think they do that?
It's kind of what Facebook taught us to do.
Yeah.
Right. So like, even if it's TikTok, for instance, what do we learn? We learn from Facebook on how to change our behavior as entrepreneurs. Right?
Yeah.
Because Facebook made it so easy, you ask any marketer right now, they still dream and fantasize about pre-iOS 14 days.
Right. Yeah.
They know it's no longer a reality, but like, they still like fantasize about it, right? They still think about it like the go-go days. So they're always, it's kind of like this gambler's mentality, right?
Yeah.
where it's like, oh my God, I hit it big that one time, and you'll always remember that one time. And
And then you
just
keep
now
chasing that, right?
chasing that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like this, it's almost like a chase for, it's like a dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
Combined with uh, a desire to get rich quick and find the shortest path to success.
Yeah.
So that's for one. Number two, I think it's the concept of, you look at most of the Shopify ecosystem, 90% of the brands that were born during the era of 2019, 2020, most of those were individuals who never ran a business before.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
They either quit their job, or they got laid off, or they decided to go, hey, we're working from home. This is my opportunity to start a business. It was a beautiful thing, right? It was
Yeah.
like, it was just this huge boom for entrepreneurship. But what also comes with that is everyone's kind of learning on the fly,
Yeah.
right? And learning on the fly, what did they learn at that point? It's kind of like, listen, you're a parent of three, I'm a parent of three. What you teach our child, what the child learns in their infancy, in those first few years,
Yeah.
very much shape their mindset and their philosophies and their thought process in future
Yep.
years. So for brands that were born during 2019, 2020, they were born with the mindset that Facebook is the only way to grow a business. And therefore, they're only born with the mentality that, hey, listen, things can happen really quick if you catch things at the right time, at the right moment. And
Yeah.
there's always going to be that chase. That's what
Yep.
they were taught at that time. And so you see brands that, most of the brands that are blowing up and they're saying we're only doing TikTok shops, they actually had a brand before that was started in 2019, 2020,
Yep.
right?
That's
That brand
fascinating.
was born on Facebook, right? So it's actually, it's this behavior that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yes, it needs to be corrected, but
Yeah.
it's also just a function of, like, everyone is kind of learning on the fly, right? That's what entrepreneurship is.
Yep.
So you're looking left, you're looking right, what's working, what's not. Everyone sees Facebook ROAS right now. If you're doing a 1.5 ROAS, you're like winning.
You're crushing.
Yeah, you're winning. So new entrants to the market don't really look at that as
Yeah.
when, listen, even though we need to diversify from Facebook, doesn't mean abandon Facebook,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. So a lot of our listeners are like sub-$1 million brands. Like they're not huge. And so as they kind of navigate this, chances are they've probably leaned pretty heavily on a single channel. How do you when you talk to brands like this, how do you kind of guide them and coach them to figure out what's the next thing they need to bolt on?
So I think one of the hardest things for brands that are getting started, is looking at all the other brands that have made it,
Yeah.
right? And
Overnight successes.
the overnight successes, or even the brands that have scaled since COVID era, and they're looking
Yeah.
at the $200 million brands and
Yep.
trying to do what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, we all want to look at successful people or successful entrepreneurs, founders, and
Yeah.
replicate their success. Often there's a whole lot that comes in the middle of that,
Right.
on that path. So what I would like, the biggest constraints on brands that are getting started are the function of funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the function of bandwidth and like actual time constraints, right? Um, and so understanding that doing things that don't scale, while it maybe feel harder, while it may take more time and resource, those are actually really positive things to do in
Yeah.
early days, right? Rolling out the red carpet for your customer is a really hard thing to do. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean have a chat widget on your website. That's not rolling out the red carpet to your customer, right? What is it that you can do to truly make them feel special?
Hmm.
And it's the early days that founders do that a lot. That happened a lot in before Facebook ads, and when it was just kind of like Instagram was the biggest organic thing. Like, it was a very big brand building, community building effort.
Yeah.
Anyone who started a brand was all about building community. And I
Yep.
think we departed from that, right? So
Yeah.
there's no earlier time to invest resources and energy into building community, building brand fans, rolling out that red carpet, making them feel special. And so that's one aspect, right? Like that, it's hard to do. It's not a scalable thing.
Yep.
It requires personal touch and personalization. The other aspect is understanding that there is no shortcut to success.
Yeah.
And if it's harder than ever to build a brand right now, then prepare for that, right? Prepare for that. Because if you learn from history, there were, let's call it 2.8. At one point, there were 4 million brands on Shopify, right? Now there's about 2.8, right?
So about what, a third of them gone out of business, shut
Third
off
of
their
them
sites.
a third went out of business. But then even from that 2.8, there's about 50% of those or more that are considered just ghost stores, right? Or zombie stores, if you will, right? In other words, born during the 2020 era, and they just kind of like,
I have a couple of those. They're just kind of fizzled out and putting along, right?
and kind of just doing a thing here and there, and that's okay, right? Like everyone set up a shop overnight, right? But there's a large majority of the Shopify ecosystem that's kind of in that, like in that mode, or like, listen, just because you're a founder doesn't mean that has to be your full-time job. A lot of people did it as a side hustle too, right? And some side hustles become a full-time job. The vast majority stay a side hustle, right?
Yeah.
So like, there's a large chunk of those out there. So, where you look at trying to avoid that scenario where your full-time founder role ends up becoming something that becomes exposed to what changed in iOS 14. iOS 14 was the biggest trigger for the zombie companies being created. It's like, oh my gosh, it just got super hard. And now, it's just no longer worth it for me to devote the attention there. And so literally that happens with an over-reliance on one channel.
Yeah.
So I think it's about surrounding yourself with the right partners. It's about testing all channels. It's about leveraging what people are doing just one step ahead of you, right? So for brands doing sub 1 million, go find and network and interact with brands that are doing sub 5 million, right? And that'll
Join a mastermind with those people.
That'll give you the clue as to what you need to do. It's very hard for a brand doing sub 1 million to truly be able to put a lot of the strategies that 100 million plus is already putting into play, right?
Yeah.
The 100 million plus they were also born during a different era.
Yes,
very few brands are 100 million plus that were born 2022 or later, right? Vast majority were born during the .com equivalent.
Yep.
And then they just found ways to survive, adapt, and then continue scaling, right?
Yeah.
So they were just born during a different era than you were.
100%. And when I said like overnight successes, that was kind of tongue in cheek, right? Like most of these brands have been building for 7, 10, 15, 20 years, but all of a sudden they're on your radar and you think, holy smokes, they launched last year. Look at this company, right? They've been doing those foundational marketing pieces, like you talk about community building, brand building, those types of things that just take time and effort. And a lot of times we don't see that or recognize that actually happened.
Spot on.
So, we have a brand that's mastered one channel. How do they figure out what's next? Like, how do they decide what they should expand into? You just made the comment that test all the channels. I mean, is that a wise move for a brand that's just crushing it on Facebook to go test 5 more channels? Or how do you guide or coach through that?
That's what a great question. And a different answer depending on what channel that they've had success on, right?
Sure.
If someone has had a great level of success on Meta, first off, hats off to you.
Lucky.
Because candidly, it's the brands that are operating at a place of scale that are having a little bit more success on Meta. But ultimately, it's understanding like what's working and what's not working, right? And if you're able to, I think LTV is actually going to tell you the story there, right?
Yeah.
So understanding what kind of channels to leverage is going to tell you, it is going to come from understanding, okay, when my customer comes into the funnel, what are they doing? What's the future behavior look like,
Yep.
right? I think there's no better way to understand what channel to expand into than to ask your existing customer base, learn from them, right?
Yeah.
I've also, talked for years about that, right? Where you can leverage learning about your customer behavior either with a mobile app or collecting first party data, or surveys, rolling out
Using no commerce to do post purchase surveys, or just calling up your freaking customers on the phone and talking to them.
1,000%, 1,000%, right? Exactly, exactly. So you learn about that customer, right?
Yeah.
And once you learn about the customer, that'll kind of give a lot of clues on what channel to explore.
Yeah.
So I think, right now I'm speaking with a baby brand, right? They're focused in the baby space. They're sub 2 million, right? So kind of very much in line with your audience. And they're like, okay, we're all in on Meta right now. What should we be doing, right? And when they looked at their cohorts and LTV, um, I wrote about this just recently in that, baby brands have a very short LTV window,
Yep.
right? And the LTV window closes virtually overnight, right?
Yeah.
Largely because why? Their kids grew up. Like to
You
no
blink and they're 12.
no fault of the brands other than the audience who they're shopping for just grew up. And this is where that LTV window means everything, which means understanding your customer. And they say, hey, our moms are shopping in the middle of the night. Our moms are are not coming after 3 or 4 sessions. They're shopping on impulse, right? So this is the reason why they're actually looking at disco, right? They're like,
Yeah.
okay, how do we maximize that LTV window? How do we get more of those types of shoppers into the funnel? And that's why they're looking at that channel.
And you're like, actually, we have all these baby brands that we work with. Let's slot you right in and boom.
Well, exactly. But I mean, like, listen, disco is amazing. It's not the only answer, but this is one example of how you evaluate a channel by learning from your customer, understanding what they're specifically asking for, what their behavior is, right? If you're looking at customers that are acquired from TikTok, you'll actually notice that their LTVs are actually substantially less than those acquired from Meta,
Yep.
right? That audience, no matter what category you're shopping in, they're programmed with a different level of an attention span, right? By virtue of what TikTok again taught us to do. So yes, we view and we rely on that first 10 words and of that video to catch our attention. And if it doesn't, we're on to the next. Shopping behavior on TikTok is literally exactly the same.
Yeah.
It promotes that very quick action. And once that moment of feeling like you want to buy goes away, it actually permanently goes away.
Yeah.
And so once those customers come into the funnel too, their attention spans as consumers are actually pre-programmed to hurt your LTV, right? And whatnot. So I think it's understanding your customer, looking at the data, and then responding to it and understanding what channels you need to explore next.
I like that. Cool. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see brands make when they try to diversify?
First, going after too many channels at once, right?
Yep.
Bandwidth is a constraint, like I mentioned before. And brands often have, and I've spoken about this before, this thing called shiny object syndrome, right? Where they very much like in childhood, it's like in childhood, you have this toy, you're really happy about this toy, you're having a great time, and you feel like, oh wait, I want that toy over there because that toy is going to be better. Very kind of like a grass is greener kind of thing, or this is going to be the quick fix to solve all of my problems. And so I think a lot of times sub 5 million, it's really tough to achieve scale on most of the primary acquisition channels.
Yeah.
So life is going to be hard. And as a result, it's very easy to fall into, I need to test these all 4 out because what I'm doing right now is not working or it's hard, right? And I think prudence is the hardest thing. Prudence in expanding into those channels is one of the hardest things to maintain, because when you're exploring new channels, that means less about them. And
Right.
therefore you're kind of guessing and you're kind of dipping your toe into each one, right? But the challenge is spread yourself too thin and you're actually never going to realize the full potential of that channel if you
Yeah.
don't devote enough attention to it. So I think spreading oneself too thin in exploring those new channels, biting too much off too quickly.
Yeah. So, like I said at the beginning, I like two channels. What's your sweet spot? And I know it depends on budget and the type of business, but like, are you kind of in that same ballpark? Start with two, start with three. Like, what does your mind and gut tell you?
I don't know if there's any one specific kind of silver bullet
Yeah.
answer on how many channels to explore. I think it's a function of how well you have performed with your existing channel to the point and how well have you kind of saved up. You think of like let's say you see, you're driving a 1989 Volvo, right? And you are looking at that Camaro, you're looking at that Mercedes, and you're like, someday I'm going to have that, right? And so you work and you work really hard, and you say, okay, I'm going to keep tucking some money away for that, right?
Yeah.
That is the exact mindset to when you're having success on any one channel. A
Yeah.
lot of times, everyone's like, hey, you're having success on one channel, put all your chips in that channel and dump all of that. I
Yeah.
actually take a different view of saying, hey, continue to emphasize that channel that's performing really well, but don't forget to create that other cushion that's going to fuel future success in other
Yep.
channels, right? And I think it comes down to how much prudence, because typically when someone's saying, I'm exploring a new channel, they're typically doing it at the moment where their current primary channel dropped in performance. It's
Yeah.
struggling. They're
They're in
making
panic mode.
it's the panic mode. It's a reactive choice to explore new channels because my primary one wasn't working before,
Yeah.
working like it was before. So I think when you think about prudence, it's like, hey, this times are good right now, and I think
Yeah.
that's the problem. We have this grass is always greener, therefore I'm going to, and they make that shift only when things get hard, right?
Yeah.
But who are the ones that can say, listen, this is working right now, but I'm not going to put everything in because this is my opportunity to understand that things won't always be like this.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yep.
know how good I have it right now. Great things don't last forever.
Yep.
Arbitrage opportunities eventually close up, and therefore this is my opportunity to say things are working. Let me start exploring a new channel in that process. So again, it's not a number of channels; it's a function of how much budget have you allocated during those good times set aside to explore those. The best time to explore a new channel is when your primary one is working, as
Is
opposed to
crushing. Yep.
exactly.
Awesome. Um, what about brands that are on very fixed budgets? Like, are there low cost options out there to help them, really ramp up their customer acquisition, or do they have to just approach things differently? Like, what would you say?
Now, I mean, that question in terms of brands with fixed budgets, actually, that applies. That's like a new thing right now.
Yeah.
We even brands operating at huge scale, right?
Yeah.
We we talked earlier about how kind of the reckoning that started with iOS 14 and things got hard in 2022. They got much harder in 2023. Brand life was the hardest, I think, in early 2023, where it was just the ultimate pain
Yeah.
that was felt, right? Um, and it was 2023 where brands said, okay, we need to operate with a different level of prudence. We need to cut costs and budgets. We need to reduce our spend at the top. We need to reduce spend on retention. We need to reduce spend
They
on
started
on
talking about contribution margin, marketing
yes,
efficiency rate, all of these acronyms that people started talking about last year. It's wild, right?
100%, right? All of those things were it was all on profitability measures, looking at efficiency, right, as
Yeah.
the primary indicator for success. But the thing is, everyone started talking about this in 2023. Everyone
Right.
started exploring this in as a new concept. Yes, profitability was a brand new concept,
Yeah.
right? That had, like it was,
Which is
and
mind boggling.
which is mind boggling. But that's the thought process that really hit home in 2023 Brand teams are leaner than ever. The average brand team has cut headcount by about almost 30% since that time. So budgets were cut across the board. So when you talk about this fixed budget, right, all of that really became a reality, that like this fixed budget must happen regardless of your scale in early 2023.
Yeah.
But it took time to implement that, right? It took time to like fully understand what that meant in theory and putting it into practice. And so that's why I call 2024 the bottom, in a good way, in a really, really good way, because it's the first time where we're operating in a non-bubble environment where the pain has already been felt. The understanding of what needs to be done to solve that pain and get out of that trough has been understood. And we've had 6 to 12 months to put those theories into practice. So in my view, I think 2024, that's why I'm so bullish on 2025, is that like we finally had the reckoning, the understanding of what needs to be done. The changes have taken effect. 2024 was that year, right? So getting back to your original question, fixed budget, what do we do in a fixed budget environment? That's like literally the story for everybody right now. And one of the most exciting things that got me so pumped about Disco, right, was the concept of saying your budget at Disco is fixed. You choose your CPA. You choose what you want to pay to acquire a new customer. With Meta or TikTok, you are going to continue to pay regardless of your performance over the course of time. You're going to continue to pay regardless, and you're just going to understand what's my return on this and try to figure that out. But regardless of whether or not people buy, you're still paying for those eyeballs, right? Whereas with Disco, you would say, well, I'm only going to pay if I get a conversion. If I get 10,000 impressions on someone's post-purchase, but nobody buys, you don't pay anything. So I think that's what got me so excited about it. We're in a fixed budget environment. So there's 12,412 software companies that are chasing the same 3,000 to 4,000 brands on Shopify right now to land them as potential logos or brands to work with, right? It's an incredibly crowded ecosystem of software. And so what got me so excited about Disco is the combination of being able to have a fixed CAC, being able to have predictable CAC, right? And then the data play that comes with that, right? That arms the brands to be able to keep those customer acquisition costs lower, to understand what channels they should be investing in. It's the data play that's going to funnel through all of that, right? So I think LTV is going to be that largest offset for rising CAC. Again, invest in LTV no matter what, whether it's actually those retention channels that everyone always talks about, that I've talked about for a really long time, or focusing on top of funnel channels that are guaranteed to bring high LTV customers into the channel. Because again, in an environment where CAC is going to continually going to go up, the only way you can offset it is by improving that LTV, right?
Got it. I love it. Okay. Predictions for next year. Where do you see us going? Are we going to have a bunch of winners next year?
I think this is going to be, as I mentioned, I think 2025 has the potential to be a pretty euphoric year. Now, euphoric, I'm not comparing euphoric to 2020 euphoric, but I think it's going to be the first breath of fresh air.
I think so.
Because brands have finally understood what needs to be done, right? In order to achieve profitability. I think expectations have been normalized, right? 10, 15% margins are good. It's strong, right? It's like we have a much more feet on the ground line of expectation of what business growth and profitability should look like. And so predictions for next year, I got some bold ones. I think on the search front, I think Bing is going to double its market share against Google.
Interesting. Okay.
Talking to this SEO guy here, like I thought I had to open with that one for sure, right? And I think that's largely going to be driven by the OpenAI partnership, and how that's just really Google's AI efforts are just not quite where they were hoping to be.
They're not great.
They're not great, and so I think Google will obviously remain the clear winner, but Bing will double its market share over the course of that time.
I like it.
I think TikTok is going to continue to be a huge performing channel. I think there's still a reluctance. I don't know why there's brands that are go all in on TikTok, and then there's this other cohort of brands that say
I won't
we
touch it.
don't do TikTok, and it's like this badge of honor,
Yeah.
right? I think that badge of honor is going to disappear really quickly, right?
Well, I think social selling in general, right? You're going to be able to start shopping on YouTube. I think any of these platforms that are doing social selling are going to be huge next year.
1,000%, 1,000%. And then one that's related to ecom, but not quite ecom, is LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is going to literally go next level next year. I think we've seen this growth of ecom operators building personal brands over the last 2 years. And that's been happening with much greater velocity. So I think the ecom community is going to have a viral moment or viral period in 2025 when it comes to LinkedIn. You're going to see more brand founders than ever building in public. You're going to see more brand founders than ever, getting out on stage and showing up on podcast. Right now, we kind of have that very similar circle of the same sets of operators that are moving from stage to stage, pod to pod. And I think we're just going to see this huge just bull run on building on LinkedIn as a part of the personal brand, right?
I hope so, because I'm tired of hearing from the same people over and over and over again. No, not a knock on them, but like I want to hear from more founders who we haven't heard of before.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited to hear about those that have grown a business post 2022 from the ground up.
Yeah.
Right. And you're seeing that, right? You're seeing them build in public. Hi, I have only $10,000 a month in revenue right now, and I'm going to start this journey building in public, right? Those are amazing stories. To build a brand right now, to start a brand right now is way harder than it ever was. And to see those people. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the ecom community. I think ecom on LinkedIn is going to have a viral moment on the personal brand building front.
I love it. Those are some fantastic predictions. And I think I'm right there with you on a lot of them. So that's awesome. Well, Neal, any final thoughts?
Well, first off, I've been following your journey for what feels like the beginning of time. And candidly, like, this was an absolute pleasure, man. Really enjoyed our chat. Really enjoyed our conversation, and looking forward to the big things to come for you.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it. And likewise, following your journey, I'm excited to see what you guys are able to do over at Disco. Already crushing it. You're going to 10X that, dude. You're going to 10X her.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's the goal. That's the goal. And looking for the big things to come. I appreciate the support.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being with us. So to everyone listening, we have learned a lot today. So make sure that you carve out some time over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully you've got 2 or 3 really strong takeaways and you can start executing against those. So thank you so much for joining.